Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, not only do I have a little helper waving at you right there, but I am using a lot of Altenew products to create a card for you today. So right here, I am showing you the Bird on Bloom. This is the Dynamic Duos from Altenew, and this comes with a stamp, a stencil, and a die, and I will be using all three of those today. I also have a background die here that's a set of 3 that I just cut from white cardstock, and I'm going to end up gluing those all together for a tone-on-tone background. I just wanted some texture in the background. I didn't want to add any more colors. These flowers that we're going to do are going to be pretty bold and vibrant, and I felt like this would be a good complement but not compete. So we're going to do a lot of stenciling and ink blending today. I will list all of the colors we are using below. Sometimes my helper covered up the colors we were using, so I will be sure to list all of those below so that you can see exactly what, like that, see exactly what colors we're using. She is helping me do some ink blending today, so we're going to go ahead and get right on into it. These stencils have some etched lines in them and some etching just to show you what stencils are, just to separate the kind of sections of the stencil that go with different portions of the image. So I am doing my best to line up kind of the etching that would be where the cone is. And we're going to do 2 flowers today. I was initially just going to do 1 card, and I do 1 card. However, I was going to do 1 flower on there, but I decided that it needed just a little bit more color and depth. So I end up using both of these for today's card. We are going to kind of speed through the stenciling. I'm not doing anything fancy today. My little helper is doing some very fabulous stenciling, if I might add. My ink pads are very, very juicy. I decided to go with Oxide inks today. That's what Peyton is the name of my helper, my daughter, and she wanted to use these ink pads. So we're going all Distress Oxide today, and we'll have a little bit of VERSAFINE Onyx Black in here toward the end. So we are doing 2 flowers and 2 birds. However, I only use 1 bird on the card today. For these flowers, I found some color inspiration on Pinterest, and I decided to do 4 colors for these flowers. So the kind of tops of this first layer is dried spice marmalade, and then the bottom is going to be mustard seed for this particular layer. I do wipe off the stencil in between each layer just so that I don't get too much contamination and I can actually see the other color that I'm applying and they're not just completely blending together. I'm trying to show you 1 flower per stenciling just so that we're not here all day. Like I said, we're not doing anything fancy here. We're just trying to get 2 different colors, 2 different tones on each of these layers. The flower petals themselves have 2 layers to give you the full flower petal. And then there's 1 layer for the cone, and then there is 2 layers for the leaves. I'm going to go ahead and speed up the video here. Like I said, we're not doing much of anything fancy here. So for this is, whoa, that was a lot of thises. Oh goodness. This is the 2nd layer for the petals on the flower, and we are doing seedless preserves and candied apple. Trying to keep the seedless preserves more toward the top of the flower, except for on this particular one, and the candied apple more toward the bottom. Now we're going to move on to the greenery. I was lazy and was trying to limit the amount of ink that was getting everywhere, so I just grabbed a couple Post-it notes and tried to do some very quick and dirty masking just so we didn't get ink absolutely everywhere. You could also like switch to a smaller blending brush if you wanted to, but she wanted to use these ones and I wasn't going to stop her. So for the greenery there, like I said, there is 2 layers for the greenery. We did, let's see, for the greenery, I did Pine Needles and Rustic Wilderness Distress Oxide inks for that. So those are the flowers done. Oh, and for the center of the flowers, I did brushed corduroy. Now we're moving on to the birds. So I kept catching a corner. I'm a very aggressive ink blender, apparently. And I kept catching a corner of the stencil for the flowers. And this bird stencil has some very, very fine, loose edges, for lack of better words. And I really didn't want to pick those up. So I switched to a mini paper pouncer because all of the layers for the bird are very, very close together. They're all along the top edge of that stencil there. And I really didn't want to have to do masking. So I just picked some of my mini paper pouncers that I got off of Amazon. And I'm just using that to put the ink down. My ink pads are very, very juicy. They've had a spa day at this point of the video, of recording and doing the voiceover of this video. And so they were very, very juicy. And so this paper pouncing actually worked very well as far as getting ink everywhere. Sometimes I did have to kind of pivot and turn the paper pouncer just to try to get into some of those nooks and crannies. If you weren't quite as an aggressive a blender, or if you wanted to take the time to put like a pixie spray behind there, which is a very low tack adhesive made for stencils, you could absolutely do that. Do I have that in my stash? Yes, I do. Did I think of that at the time? No, I did not. For the body of the bird, there are 2 layers for the body. And for that, I chose Scattered Straw and Shabby Shutters. And then for the wing of the bird, I went with Hickory Smoke and Pumice Stone. So those are the layers for the bird. And then for its beak and its feet, that is another layer of the stencil down below, kind of in the bottom left-hand corner of the stencil. I chose to do just black soot for that. And then there is a stamp set that comes with this that does more details on, it has a layer to do more details on the bird and more details to do on, to have on the leaves of the flowers. And then it also has one for like the cone of the flowers, like the cone part of the flowers, the center of the flower. And I do end up using the detail layer for the bird and for the cone flower. I'm going to go ahead and speed this part of the video up also. Again, I'm not doing anything fancy, just trying to kind of pivot and move that little mini paper pouncer around just so that I can ensure that I'm getting in all those nooks and crannies. I did not line up these stencils perfectly. I would venture to say I didn't line them up very well at all. But I did enjoy the process. If I would have referred to the Altenew packaging, I probably would have gotten better results, but I did not. I was just free ranging it and going with what I was in the mood for at the time. Here is the VERSAFINE Onyx Black ink. I just grabbed an acrylic block, although you could use your Misty or whatnot for that. And I failed to mention, I am working on a waffle flower grit mat. That is what is holding all of those die cuts and my stencils in place. I find this to be a very valuable tool. Altenew does have, sorry, my head is going to totally get in the way and completely block your view. I apologize for that. You get a look at my greasy hair. That is the only way that I could find to somewhat line that up straight. And did I line it up perfectly straight? No, I did not. Once again, my head is going to get in your way, but this is the detail layer to the centers of the flowers. And I, again, just grabbed an acrylic block and that same VERSAFINE Onyx Black ink to stamp in those flower centers. There are separate flower centers for both the top flower and the bottom flower, and I did use both of those. Moving on to the sentiments. I die cut out the sentiments twice each. Retrospect, looking back, I probably, if I were to do this again, these sentiments are very, very teeny tiny. I probably would have stamped them first and then die cut them, but I was in a die cutting role, and so that's just what I did. They're not perfectly lined up, but what I used to assist myself is I kept one of the negatives that I die cut the sentiments out from. I placed the sentiments onto the stamp as best, or the die cut as best I could after I placed the positive in there. And then I just have an acetate sheet here. This is from Simon Says Stamp. And this just is helping act as a barrier. So I'm going to apply ink there. You saw me apply that VERSAFINE Onyx Black ink to the stamp and stamp over that acetate sheet. This just helps me see if I'm terribly off and I need to realign, or if it's good enough for government work. And they were good enough for government work. They were not perfectly aligned, but at this point I was just kind of in a funk a little bit, in a mood, and I really wanted to get this card done and have a little bit of a win and a sense of accomplishment. And so, is it perfect? No. But did I enjoy the process and feel accomplished? Yes, I did. So now that I'm okay with how they are, I'm going to go ahead and stamp them again. I feel like the die kind of engraved some lines in there. I thought maybe that my stamp was dirty, but it wasn't. There were just some kind of engraved lines inside the dies that it made the stamp look like it was skipping. I do end up stamping them 2 or 3 times, and again, I think it would be better if I were to use this particular die and stamp set again to probably stamp them first and then go back and die cut them. Moving on to the background, like I said, I cut all of these out. This background die set, you can use whatever one you have in your stash. I apologize, I do not know what this one is called. This was before I started labeling and making videos and that kind of stuff. So, but any kind of die you have in the back, or any die you have for backgrounds, or you could even do dry embossing with a stencil, that would work. Also, you could do stamping in the background. I just wanted there just to be a little bit of interest and texture in the background without it distracting from our florals. So I am just adding little dots of glue and putting a line of glue around the perimeter of the die and then laying it on there, lining it up. The liquid glue gives you a little bit of wiggle room to make sure everything's lined up appropriately. And then I am using my MISTI as a weight to kind of adhere everything together and make sure that glue is set. When that's all done, I'm going to apply liquid glue again to the stack of die cuts and glue those flat to my card base, which is just a white A2 size card base, also made out of the same HAMMERMILL cardstock. I did have to trim that card base a little bit. It wasn't lined up quite right, and so I did do some trimming with my paper trimmer to get that aligned correctly, and I did put my MISTI back on there to get everything to dry. Here I'm doing a little bit of die cut surgery. I wanted there to be 2 separate flowers, and I didn't want to necessarily, I wanted to preserve that other flower. So I just did a little bit of die cut surgery, and here I'm showing you that we got a little crazy with our ink blending, and so I'm going to use the petals of the other flower to cover up our boo-boo. So there's always a way, whether you add a gem or a pearl, or you add more splatters and kind of lean into the mistake, what have you. Here I'm trying to figure out what kind of layout I like. I felt like that layout was okay, but I really liked the bird up high and kind of that sentiment nestled down low. I just felt that worked a little bit better. So I'm going to adhere all of these down flat. Once I get kind of the layout where I want them, I am going to lay them all down flat and, glue them down flat. I made sure to start with the flower that we were covering up the boo-boo on first, and then putting the other one that we did not do surgery on next, and then the bird goes on last. And I'm using my magnets from my glass board. My glass board is magnetic to just apply extra pressure so that everything stays down flat. I'm grabbing a Dollar Tree foam square and cutting that down to place behind our sentiment. I could have just went ahead and run my die through my die cut machine a few more times to stack it, but this was easier at this point, and honestly, I didn't think about grabbing my dies. Sorry if you can hear my son in the background. I'm not sure what he's doing. He's supposed to be napping, but he doesn't sleep, so I don't sleep. So that's where we are in life. Anyway, you see me just cutting these Dollar Tree foam squares apart just to place behind there. I have actually really enjoyed these Dollar Tree foam squares. I feel like they have worked really well for me. They adhere well, the backer comes off, they've got a nice loft to them without it being extreme. And obviously they are $1.25 for a very generous roll of them. I did take a black pearl from my stash and apply a dot of glue to the eye of the bird and place that little gem on there, or excuse me, pearl on there. Now I'm going to go ahead and place my sentiment, and then we are ready for bells and whistles. For finishing touches, I did add some Spectrum Noir clear glitter brush pen to the petals of the flower and to the center of the flower, the cone, and to the greenery. One thing to keep in mind is that these are reactive inks with water, and so I did have some pigment start to move a little bit. You'll see me kind of reach off to the side right there and kind of scratch off the pigment that was on the brush before I moved on to a different, color family. So before I moved on to a different, section of these flowers. Oh, and I did put it on the bird also. So all of the things got sparkle today. All the things did. So just be cautious of, that ink starting to move. You wouldn't necessarily want to scrub back and forth, and you really don't have to scrub back and forth in order to get pigment down. But there's just this really pretty shiny sparkle, and that is the card complete. I did take that extra flower and put that into the inside of the card. I was going to put the other bird, but I had that pearl on there for the eye, and I didn't want there to be like extra bulk in the inside that would make it close all weird. So I just put that bird back in its packaging, and I did trim off any flowers that were hanging over the edge of the card. I did just trim those off with my long scissors there. But that is the card complete. I thank you for spending time with me today. I hope you felt inspired, and we will see you next time.